What I love about cybersecurity. Go.
I love that we are never done, but it's also something I hate about it.
It's time to begin the CISO Series podcast.
Welcome to the CISO Series podcast. My name is David Spark. I am the producer of said CISO Series, and joining me for this very episode, it's my co-host, one of your favorites, whether you like it or not. It's Andy Ellis. He's the operating partner over at YL Ventures. Say hello to the audience, Andy.
Hello to the audience, Andy.
There you go. That is one of the most classic old jokes, like walk this way.
And sometimes that's just all I've got going. So
there you go. We're available at CISOseries.com. And our sponsor for today's episode, new sponsor with the CISO Series, love having them on board. It is Silk. Revolutionize your risk resolution process with Silk. And we'll be explaining exactly how they're doing that later in the show. So, Andy, one of the side things I've done, which is technically not part of the CISO Series, but is in the world of security, is living in the San Diego area. I started with Rick McElroy, the San Diego Cyber Group, and it's a meetup group.
Mm-hmm.
Do you go to a local meetup group in the Boston area yourself, Andy?
Bostonians don't really do meetups.
Really?
I got to say. I mean, they do exist, but there's not nearly as many of them. Well, we spend like 4 months out of the year where you don't want to leave your house. That's certainly not to go drive on roads.
Great thing about San Diego, you leave your house at any time, except when it's raining.
You don't have weather, you have climate.
Yes. It's kind of, as I like to brag, I never turn on my heat. I never turn on my air conditioning, ever. It's kind of nice. Anyways, it's the San Diego Cyber Group. For those listeners who live in the San Diego area, just go to the meetup.com and search San Diego Cyber Group. Anyways, it has been a thrill. We just started it a little over half a year ago. It's been great. We've got now about 60 people showing up to our meetups. We have been sadly keep moving locations because we have issues with one. We've been doing it all at breweries and one issue after another. And you would think they'd be tripping over themselves to know, a group of people are going to show up once a month and give them a lot of money. But for some reason, they can't figure out how to manage that issue. And then we have to keep moving to the next one. We're hoping we find the right location. But doesn't a promise of continuous money seem to be an attractive factor for a business, don't you think?
So you have to recognize that sometimes the costs outweigh the income you bring in. We've talked about firing clients before.
Yes.
Right. Sometimes you just have customers that you're like, yeah, I actually don't want your business because it's not worth it.
Hold it. Now, you're assuming that I'm difficult to work with, Andy, with that insinuation.
Oh, there is no assumption required.
I am not difficult to work with. In fact, that's quite the opposite. I try to make it as easy as possible, but it's always been one issue after another. And that's my complaint about it. But we have a new location, been super happy with it. In fact, when this drops, the next day we have our event, which is on the 27th. We do it on the Wednesday. So if you're hearing this tomorrow, we're having an event. So please join us.
Excellent.
All right, let's get our guest on, who is, I think, our most frequent guest across all our programs. He's been on all our shows except, I think, Capture the CISO. I believe he hasn't been on that. No, you have been on that?
I was on the very first recording.
Then I take that back. He's been on every show multiple times, and he's back here again. Thrilled to have him.
And finally, he has graduated to get to be on a show that I'm hosting.
Oh, you consider that a graduation, not a demotion?
Oh, absolutely. We test run with everybody else before he gets to come hang out with everybody's favorite co-host.
Get to level up to Andy.
It's the boss level.
He's the CISO for the World Connect Corporation, Sean Bowen. Sean, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me again. As always, I enjoy it. And I will be in San Diego in September. Hopefully it lines up with the meetup.
The Great CISO Challenge.
With the changing regulatory landscape, we talk a lot about uncertain times ahead for CISOs. That might lead you to assume that there is an increasing job dissatisfaction in the role. But that doesn't seem to be the case with a recent survey from ESG and ISSA showing CISOs outpace other cybersecurity roles in average job satisfaction. But John Olczyk at CISO Online noticed that those same figures show that roughly a third of CISOs think the job is much harder than 2 years ago, well ahead of the overall industry, with 6 in 10 saying they feel stressed out most of the time. So how do we make sense of this, Andy? That CISOs seem to feel more stress more often in a job that they think is harder, yet they remain satisfied. I mean, what's the correlation here?
So this is one that I'm always very, very cautious about, things that look like longitudinal surveys, but might or might not be, right? So satisfaction is up, but at the same time, like people are saying, is harder than it used to be. Like, this is a very important thing. This is not, we've interviewed the same people 2 years ago and we've interviewed them today and asked how hard it is. We interviewed people today and asked them if they think the job has gotten harder than it was. So maybe we're not actually talking to the same CISO. I know a lot of CISOs in the last 2 years who have permanently retired from being a CISO.
Yeah.
So,
by the way, we're speaking to one right now.
Yeah, I retired 3 years ago from being a CISO. So, like, I could tell a story. I don't think it's the true story of, there are more people now who are CISOs who were not CISOs 2 years ago, and they think the job is harder, but they're way more satisfied because they're getting a better paycheck. That's potentially one argument.
Hold it. Did they interview people who are no longer CISOs?
They're not interviewing people who are no longer CISOs, but imagine if somebody took this survey.
Yeah.
They became a CISO in the last 2 years for the first time. So they got a huge pay raise. So they're very satisfied. But at the same time, like, this job is much harder than my predecessor had it. Like, my predecessor had an easy job. I don't know what they were talking about.
So they don't assume that they were a CISO 2 years ago.
No. Not from what I was able to skim looking at it. So always be careful about looking at surveys like this and drawing too many conclusions. Is the job more stressful? Absolutely. Saying as somebody who's on the outside looking in, I think CISOs today have it harder than I had it 4 years ago.
I think just the complexity makes it so much harder. It just keeps getting more complex. You don't think?
Actually, I think it's good. I think the job's getting simpler.
Oh, Sean, you call him out on this. Sean, who is currently a CISO, who just admitted at the beginning of the show that he loves and hates the fact that job is never done. Is it getting easier, or is it getting harder or simpler as Andy believes it to be? And he's not in the mix of it all, so he really doesn't have much to say here, does he?
I can't wait to see all the comments that we're going to get after this drops, by the way.
Yes. Well, okay. So I'll add fuel to the fire in some aspects. I'll pick on Andy since we have a long relationship and we came from similar backgrounds in the military. I also think that there's a divide that's not recognized between CISO affiliations. There's the CISOs of, call them the Silicon Valley CISOs, like the CISOs of IT companies and SaaS providers. They have a very different look on CISO role and the landscape than the non-IT company CISOs. Like me, I work for a fuel management, logistics, and energy company. Very different organization than those types of companies. And so in some cases, I think it's easier in the sense that I came from the government, and what I missed about the government was I had rules that I can lean on when I needed to get something done. I can always say, well, the White House said, the Congress said, or the Pentagon said, and that trumped whatever my supervisor didn't want to do. When I came to the corporate world, I learned I have to be really good as a salesman to convince people that security is important, because they didn't necessarily believe it was as important as it is. And so with some of the regulation changes, it's becoming easier, but it's also significantly harder in the sense that a lot of the corporate CISOs that work in non-IT companies have a gigantic security debt to clean up. And there was a conversation recently with some CISOs talking about a very specific product space, saying that this is just a waste of money. Why are CISOs buying it? And I said, yeah, that's nice to work in a company that's all modern, started in the cloud, is currently in the cloud, compared to a company that is cleaning up 20-year-old technology on the regular. And that's not uncommon. And we thankfully have gotten rid of a lot of that. But when I first got here, that was one of the big problems that we had. And I'm probably the anomaly by cleaning that all up. So yeah, there's definitely an uphill battle. But I think that the recognition and the structure that's coming is good. And it's something I've been advocating for. I would love to have a gap for security, some sort of standardized protocol that we're all measuring the same way, whatever it might be. That doesn't mean that we have to get the same success. Just like in Gap, it doesn't say that you all have to have the same profit margin. It just says you have to measure profit the same way. And we need to get to some common measuring standard. I think that will also help us tell the story in a consistent way.
Why are CISOs leaving the profession?
So we're going to continue talking about stress. We've talked before about how common stress and burnout become in cybersecurity. A recent post on the cybersecurity subreddit blew up, talking about the factors that lead to burnout, ranging from issues like disconnect with IT and sales, failures in change management, and just feeling alone in their security mission. The post author said they were lucky enough to save up for a long sabbatical to rethink their career. It raises the question, what are the factors that should cause you to either rethink your job or look to shift your career? Now, both of you are still in cybersecurity. Have you questioned your career at multiple times? Be honest here. I'll start with you, Sean.
100%. I think one of the things, and my boss gave me this feedback. He says that it's very clear that I have a passion and I love what I do, and that makes it easier for me to do what I want to do because it's very stressful and I have to deal with defeat on a regular basis and find comfort in that. But because of my passion and love for this space, I'm able to push through. And so there are definitely times where I've gone into the job and said, God, just I see the end result is so clear to me. Like, what am I doing to not get the rest of the people to see that clarity? And so that's been the focus for me, that challenge. I think when I started in my career, I loved being in the server room. I was that guy that swore I'm never going to leave the server room. I didn't want to be right here. And then over time, and it was because I love solving the problem. I love solving the technical piece. And now I'm realizing that the problem of people is much more fun for me. And so trying to convince people to see what I see is how I look at my daily life, and I don't succeed, so I come back and try something new, and that for me has made me enjoy the job showing up, despite some of my frustrations. But I think you have to have your external factors, right? I have my family. I skydive. That's people know that quite well. So every once in a while, I just need to check out and go do something fun, and then come back with a new attitude towards it. So it's there, but I think we had a lot of people in security join for the money. Frankly, I think there was a lot of people that were in the cert boot camps, getting every cert they could, chasing that dollar figure. And now they're realizing that they're expected to actually perform and they suck at it.
Well, there's a reason you get paid well, because of the stress and the knowledge you need to know.
But they suck at critical thinking. They suck at basic things. Like they might pass the test of connecting A to B, but they can't interpolate or extrapolate when there's a problem. And that's the critical thinking skill that we want. And then there's also this added factor of you can no longer live in the basement and be successful. You have to be a human interface for your space. And that's not something that is there. And I think there's also the fact that we teach people security and we don't teach people risk. And so you work your way all the way up to director, focusing on security. And then all of a sudden you have to interface with the business and you have to balance risk. And we don't teach our career path to think about risk. It's all about secure at 100% or else you failed. And we have to teach that how to balance risk a lot sooner in our career.
All right, Andy, I want to know, tell me one moment that you questioned, should I still be a CISO? Now, you are no longer one, so you did finally make that decision.
Yeah, so for me, really easy. I've questioned it a lot, and I've been where the person who wrote this Reddit thing was. And I will tell you, go read the Reddit post if you're listening right now. And I think we put it in the links here. And if you agree with this person, like you can empathize with them, but if you sympathize and you're like, oh, they're so right, then you need to question whether you're in the right career field. Because I will tell you this very brutally hard truth. If you're in the cybersecurity career field, you are one of the least important people in your company.
That does not feel good.
No, like you are like the sidekick to the sidekick. Now, look, we've all seen places where like the sidekick to the sidekick fails and the hero loses, but we're like Jarvis in the Iron Man suit. Like we help Iron Man get stuff done, but we don't do anything ourselves. And what happens when Jarvis gets a lot of power? He becomes Ultron and tries to destroy the world. And that's kind of the security problem, which is we try to make things perfect. And the way it would be perfect is if you didn't have a business to protect. And that's the actual logical outcome of perfect security that Sean was just talking about. So it's not just that we have to understand risk. We have to understand the business. So your mission, your vision for yourself as a security professional should be something like we enable the business to make better risk choices. Like, we're going to help them by making things that they don't need to pay attention to easy, and the things they need to pay attention to, we want to give them clear choices about the risks that they're taking. And if you don't think that's your job, maybe you should go find a different job.
I do want to say, we're not trying to be discouraging.
No.
There are a lot of very talented people in this space, and I am impressed on a regular basis with some of the thought process and the execution that people are doing. But this particular post and the stress that people are identifying with, that is a part of the job, and it's not often talked about. And so we're not saying everyone should quit and be out. It's just saying have an understanding of reality of there's more than just getting to play with computers.
Before I go any further, I do want to tell you about our absolutely awesome sponsor, Silk. Silk, they're awesome. Let me tell you, are you feeling anxious about risks lurking in alert backlogs? Are you frustrated with remediation requests stuck in the twilight zone? Instead of toiling over spreadsheets and watching alert backlogs build up, Silk helps security teams regain control over the risk posture. So designed with security practitioner in mind, Silk consolidates and contextualizes all of your vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, and AppSec findings across your IT footprint and assets, so you can quickly focus on the most urgent risks to your environment and business. Silk then automates assigning the right remediation recommendation to the right owner through their right workflow tool. So using AI and environmental analysis, Silk's predictive ownership assignment eliminates the time suck of back and forth emailing to identify asset and remediation owners. With Silk's centralized reporting and ticketing integrations, there's no more logging into multiple systems to create a ticket for asset owners and track down remediation or exception request status. So security teams get visibility in one place across all remediation tasks by team, by remediation category, and can easily communicate with stakeholders through a single dashboard to provide guidance or keep track of exception requests. Security teams get to both resolve more critical cyber risks in a fraction of the time with Silk, and they shift organizational dynamics through a comprehensive remediation lifecycle for better accountability and transparency. It's like the whole workflow, and Silk can help you with it. So you can learn more if you go to their website. It's silk, S-I-L-K, .security. That's it, silk.security. Go check it out.
It's time to play What's Worse?
All right, Andy, I'm just going to say this comes from Olivia Phillips of Amtrak, who's given us stuff before.
Awesome.
And I will tell you, both of these situations are catastrophic. All right?
Okay. I might be on Amtrak next week, or I guess last week after this drops. So we'll see. I hope it's nothing catastrophic there.
Let's hope not. All right, here we go. Scenario number one. Your organization falls victim to a ransomware attack where malicious actors encrypt your critical business systems and data and are demanding payment in exchange for the decryption keys. Sounds like a classic ransomware attack.
Yep.
Here are your situations.
How much are they asking for?
I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
There is no network traffic to shift through due to budget cuts. You do not have the $50 million the attackers are asking for, and you do not have cyber insurance. All right. So your basic really bad. All right.
Yep. I love this scenario. I'm happy with this one. Let's see the next one.
All right. Now the organization, this is scenario number two, the organization becomes a target of a sophisticated and persistent cyber espionage campaign conducted by nation state actors or advanced cyber criminal groups. Now, this APT attack is aimed at stealing sensitive information, gathering intelligence, and disrupting operations. Pretty much got the big three right there. So the outage has caused an extended period of disruption of operations, causing significant challenges for detection, attribution, and mitigation. The servers are brought down, and the last backup was 3 years ago. Yeah, obviously somebody wasn't doing their job. And all employee PII information was deleted. So these both seem awful. Andy, which one's worse?
So they're awful and they're differently awful. I'm going to say the second one is marginally worse. Because I look at this and I'm saying, I got a $50 million budget based on this first one, right?
Yes.
What am I going to do with $50 million? I'm going to throw out all of the bad IT systems that just got compromised, shift to being a SaaS native corporation overnight, to give everybody brand new systems, be like, yep, here we go, because we don't trust that we're going to get our data back, and we don't have $50 million to throw around.
So essentially, you're just rebooting the company.
Because honestly, if you're getting nailed by ransomware that can take out all of your back-end systems, your back-end systems need to go away anyway. So do you want to pay the ransomware and then not be able to afford to upgrade, or just do the upgrade? Figure out how you're going to recover from paper-based stuff, because I'm sure that Sean's still shipping paper-based invoices around somewhere. There's got to be somebody in your company doing it. Sean's like, no, not me.
We've modernized with OCR.
Yeah. But I think the second one is actually worse than the first one, because they are not going to go away no matter what as you try to clean up.
All right, Sean, what do you think? Which one's worse?
All right, this is exactly what you want, David. You want me to disagree with Andy, and I'm going to.
I'm all for you don't have to, but I am all for it.
He loves it when that happens.
I'm prepared to it just for the sake of the show, but also because I actually believe it. The second one is theoretically easier for me because of our friends at the Bureau. As soon as you bring in espionage, I'm calling my buddies in the government and having them take over this whole thing. And I have free labor to help me with a lot of this work. So, and if necessary, they'll bring in the National Guard. They've done all of this in the past with other situations. So depending on the criticality of your business, obviously, and if it's coming from Amtrak, I'm going to assume that for the transportation space, this would definitely receive that level of support. And so for me, the second one, I have a little bit more help. I would definitely get help from the Bureau with ransomware. And so I would reach out to them in the same situation for that, and we'll do our best through that space there. But with the espionage, that is their bread and butter, and I would look forward to the help that they would jump in on.
So Andy has been laughing his butt off through your whole answer here. And by the way, this is not assuming that it's happening to Amtrak. It just happened to be the submitter who works at Amtrak.
That's who submitted it. It's not. So just
my company is also a critical infrastructure enough that I can make that phone call. So
just to point out that I think the 6th ever person convicted for economic espionage was targeting me and us. And I will tell you that was a 4-year investigation in which we got almost zero support, because the U.S. Attorney's Office was more interested in building a case in their spare time than in helping us do anything.
Andy, you've been retired. You need to go away.
If you're going to rely on the FBI to show up and save your bacon, ooh.
I will advocate for them strongly. And I know David's had some of them on their show recently, and they have definitely made a change for the better in the last couple of years since your retirement. So I ask you to come back and join us in the CISO force and experience some of that, because there's definitely some things that they still got to work through. I mean, we know this from the government life. There's still some evidence acquisitions and case, et cetera, but their cyber task force has done a tremendous job in getting their hands dirty with the partners in the private sector. And so I don't disagree. 4 or 5 years ago, I would have given them the same grade that you just gave them. But I think in the last year or so, Director Ray and his staff all the way down through the cybersecurity side has done a tremendous job. Brian Borden and David. And so there's a couple of folks out there that are doing a phenomenal job there.
I'm glad to hear that then. But I hope nobody actually needs to call them.
No, but you should. If you work for a private company, you should know your local FBI contact.
What's your security advice?
Given that so many commercial apps are built on open source code that can be easily tainted, security leaders have become obsessed with securing the software supply chain. Now, everyone realizes it's challenging, and multiple vendors have popped up to offer solutions. Clint Gibler and Francis Odom of TLDR Sec recently analyzed the vendor landscape, finding vendors focused on 3 distinct areas in this space of trying to secure the software supply chain. So source code, build, and deployment. They found, quote, the greatest value lies in vendors who can seamlessly bridge the gap between security and engineering teams. Given that there is a great need and there are solutions, how should CISOs evaluate where a software supply chain vendor, those offering solutions to secure the actual supply chain, makes the most sense in their organization? What should you be looking at to analyze?
So I think that I would take the original premise and say, you're not trying to necessarily protect against malicious code injection all the way upstream in a software in the open source world. And in fact, if you're a vendor in this space and that's your argument is you should buy me so that you can detect it, you're doing it wrong. You should just be doing that pro bono of like, we're going to monitor the top 20 top 50 open source projects and protect them. And then here's what we do downstream. So when you think about the software supply chain, I actually really don't like that phrase anymore. I actually think that's the application ecosystem. I think what we have done as an industry is we've said protecting applications is a problem that we're fragmented. Oh, you have a WAF for the operational environment, and you do source code security, and you do secrets detection, you do all of these different things. And what we actually need to say is the software supply chain is your application ecosystem from the first piece of code that gets written until it's out in production. And so what I want to see is how are you protecting everything in an integrated fashion, not just point solutions that do one thing here, one thing there, but like if you're doing secrets detection early in code, how are you helping me do some form of tokenization or key management later on? Or if you're going to do prioritization of defects, how are you also doing application security testing? How are you also doing integration with my WAF? So I think we're going to make this shift. I think Gartner has recently talked about the new ASPM, application security posture management, as being something like this that says, treat your application ecosystem, which is the software supply chain that does include ingest, but stop freaking out about ingest. Think about the whole ecosystem in your environment and how are you protecting it holistically.
Sean, do you agree with this philosophy of we should be shifting our thinking to the application ecosystem rather than the software supply chain?
Yeah, I think not just application, but a lot of the other, in general, the way we've approached all of our security is we looked at it as layers in the cake, and we need to look at the slice of cake that's going to a particular individual. So that application from top to bottom needs to get its own view because that's how their development cycle works. And I think the other piece, and one of the things that I think is very poignant on here, is it says the greatest value lies in vendors who can seamlessly bridge the gap between security and engineering teams. And I think one of the failures is on the security teams. When we meet with the vendors, we meet with them by ourselves. And if you're not bringing your engineering team or your development team or whoever it might be into those meetings to be part of those sessions, you're starting off behind the curve already. And so I still this from one of our phenomenal architects, Mike Villas. He says he steals it from Atlassian, but I only ever hear him say it, is get in the path of the developer. And that's what we try to do when we look at whatever tooling we have, is we try to make sure that the tooling isn't a security pet that we get to keep and have fun with, but it's a tool that we both get to use. We get it for our values, but they can leverage it at the time that they need it during their development, doing their engineering, not showing up a week after they're done producing or publishing their product, and we go, here's your report, you failed. We want to get that at the time of development or time of creation. And so bringing them in and finding their value stream and seeing how the products can be part of their build cycle, their CI/CD process, whatever process you happen to use in your company, you want them to be satisfied with how you're implementing the tool against them. And so it's a partnership that we need to look at internal to the company. But I do agree that what we need to be, from the product space, we need to be looking at things more holistically and not layers. Because for me, we have dozens of teams, squads that are focused on various different products. We have several dozen products that we produce. And if I'm using one tool across it, I look at the single number, but that doesn't help anyone. I need to be able to divvy that up and give that to individuals. And then I go to the next product and I do the same thing. And so being able to, in an ASPM space, look at the vertical slice helps me tremendously.
Surprising research just in.
Since LLMs went mainstream, we've been hearing about how they could be used by threat actors. Now, we're now starting to see what that could mean in reality. Last month, Microsoft and OpenAI released a new report about threat actors using LLMs to sharpen their cyber attacks. Now, Hackersbait provided research looking at the effectiveness of LLMs hacking sandbox websites. They saw a sea change in LLM effectiveness against a sandbox set known vulnerabilities. So with GPT-4 able to succeed at exploiting 73% of the time after 5 tries, compared to just 6.7% success by GPT 3.5, and virtually no success with other models. So Hackersbait suggested sites use a WAF patch regularly, and use secure coding practices. All seem logical here. Nothing new. But what changes when it's so much cheaper to attack and the volume of these attacks will go up? And I've addressed this multiple times, but I want your take on this. Like, it's not different. It's just more and more effective, it seems.
So take this one with a grain of salt, because if you keep reading in the study that when they took this GPT-4 and said, okay, now that you've worked against the sandbox, you're 73.3% effective, let's go hit 50 unmaintained websites, and it found one cross-site scripting attack, right? So this is GPT-4 can now basically pass a course in exploiting vulnerabilities, like on a training set. Here's an academic environment to show you how to do the basics. Like, it gets a C grade against what a human could do. That's still better than the complete F grade 3.5 was getting, but this is still not at the level you want to have it at. Not for replacing anything in your ecosystem, for doing your pen testing. If you went and grabbed GPT-4 and said, oh, I don't need to have a human analyst go look at my website, you're completely missing the point here, which is this is good for finding the bare bones minimum. You throw GPT-4 at yourself and it finds 80 things, then you're in a real world of hurt because it's not good enough to find anything that a human can look for.
Sean, I throw this to you.
It's not surprising to me. Like, look at the history of mankind, right? We invent fire and then we burn people with it. We invent spears, we throw them at other people. We invent guns, we use them for bad reasons. Like, everything that's built for good has been used for bad. Go figure that bad people would find a way to exploit LLMs or any of the AI technology to do bad things. So not surprising. Yes, I would call into question some of the testing as being a little bit clickbaity, but that's not to say that AI is not going to be in a place. I mean,
right.
The thing that it's doing in the medical fields, in the investing in everything that we're doing in the space, it's very clearly just needs the right trainers. And in this case, the wrong trainers, right? And so it's definitely going to be a problem.
Yeah. I'm not actually convinced that the LLMs are going to be the source of the real problem in website analysis. I don't think the LLM technology is the right way for AI to push down this. There's other paths that then LLMs can manipulate and use, but this is more around different sorts of NLP and different sorts of.
But the LLM is just speaking to the speed and the effectiveness and the quantity, I think, is really what the issue is.
Well, so I would first, obviously, I think this is a nuance, but I think it's going to be SLMs are going to be the winner in this, the small language models, because you want to get it hyper tailored. The fact that it's able to go through generative decision making, as long as we teach that generative decision tree to be malicious, which I don't think is going to be very difficult.
That's easy.
I think it's going to become a very powerful tool for folks to come at you. But your ultimate question is, what changes when the cheaper attack? I mean, same thing that's always changed, right? 20 years ago, denial of services required a significant coordination by threat actors. Today, it's $5 on the dark web, and you get thousands of bots. So this is the ebb and flow. This is the spar that we are constantly in. Back to my original statement, right? What do I love and hate? We're never done. As soon as something good comes out, we have to immediately start thinking about how someone's going to use it for bad. And that's what I love about it is everything I learned 5 years ago is useful today, but not really useful at the same time. So we're gonna go through the same iterations that we've always done. But I'm, as a practitioner in cybersecurity, I'm excited for this fun. Like, this is like we're upping our game, and I hope that we on the blue team side can up our game equally.
Right. I want to see this built into going to the previous question about the application security ecosystem, the supply chain. Like, this should be part of your ASPM. That's going to go do things. It should be AI enabled to say, hey, I'm going to do the application security testing, and I'm not just going to like run a script. I'm also going to run a language model.
Thanks, Andy. Now I'm going to get about 12 salespeople pitching me some AI ASPM thing.
All right.
And call Sean Bowen. He has budget for this.
Andy, always making our guests' lives more difficult. Thank you, Andy. That brings us to the very end of the show. We greatly appreciate having you on again, Sean Bowen, who is the CISO over at World Connect Corporation. I'll let you have the very last word. But first, let me mention our spectacular sponsor, and that's Silk. Remember, go to their website, silk.security, to revolutionize your risk resolution process. We're talking about the whole process. Deal with everything, because finding things is great. Understanding what you need to do is great, but actually solving them is ultimately what you want to do. Check them out at silk.security. Andy, as always, we greatly appreciate you having on the show and your great wisdom. I know if those of you who have not picked up his book, 1% Leadership, which, by the way, if you ever have a Zoom call with him, it's always persistently in his background, so you can't avoid it. And also, just so you know, if you thought my read of the sponsor was excellent, you can credit Andy, because entirely he was trying to distract me while I was doing that.
Is it with hand puppets?
Yes, with hand puppets. Mr. Sean Bowen, who, by the way, has hired person/people don't know because of his connection through the CISO series. Are you in any way still hiring at this moment?
We actually are hiring right now, and we're going through some org design decisions first, but we are hiring.
All right. Well, he does like listeners to the CISO series, so please contact Mr. Bowen. There'll be a link to his LinkedIn profile on this very episode. Any other last words, Sean?
I do want to say, as we talked about earlier, this space is stressful, but it is a ton of fun, and you meet a lot of good people. I do not think that there is a industry that has more collaboration than cybersecurity, because generally the rest of the business is competitive to others, so they don't want to share their secrets. We have a tight bond with our CISO peers, and obviously the security professionals within our teams love to bond to others, and so there is a strong community in the cybersecurity space. And I encourage you to reach out and be part of that. And it will help with some of that stress, and it'll help you learn and attack your job in a different fashion. And so please reach out to security folks and join if you're in San Diego.
Yes, come tomorrow.
Yeah, and then it's not just about drinking beers, but it's about meeting people that are going through the same stress that you are.
And drinking beers with them.
It's also about drinking kombucha, because where we are, they're going to be selling kombucha as well. But if you can't come tomorrow, we're trying to aim for last Wednesday of every month. I'm sorry, are both of you doing a talk at RSA? Yes? I know you are, Andy.
I am.
I talk a lot in general, but they don't not on stage.
Not on stage.
Yeah, no. So I'm pitching. I just want to push for my RSA talk, because I'm doing a talk on you can't measure risk.
Yes, it's anti-fair presentation.
I'm anti-fair. So if you're like, oh my God, fair is the greatest thing ever, come and feel free to heckle me. Tell me how I'm wrong. But if you're very interested in understanding how to communicate about risk, you should come find me Wednesday afternoon at 2:55 in the Moscone Center.
Go see him out. Thank you, everybody. We greatly appreciate your contributions and for listening to the CISO Series podcast.
That wraps up another episode. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do. We have lots more shows on our website, CISOseries.com. Please join us on Fridays for our live shows, Super Cyber Friday, our virtual meetup, and Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review. This show thrives on your input. Go to the Participate menu on our site for plenty of ways to get involved, including recording a question or a comment for the show. If you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact David Spark directly at david@cisoseries.com. Thank you for listening to the CISO Series podcast.